David Brewster here with a new episode of Chordplay. This is the Chords of Danzig, and I've had some requests to feature some of Danzig's music. Definitely a legendary metal band. And Danzig formed in 1987 in New Jersey, and this was technically Glenn Danzig's third, band project. And it erupted. Definitely found an audience, found some fans. The song Mother, actually was released in 1988 on their first album, but it wasn't until the early to mid 90s, and it really blew up on MTV. Headbangers Ball, 120 minutes, and just regular rotation, also on the radio too. So it's really interesting that like an older song took a few years and then erupted, about 4 or 5 years after it was released. And Danzig's released 12 studio albums, 3 EPs, 1 live album, and 1 compilation. And there's no question, Danzig is an authority as far as spooky music. Originally, I guess, horror punk with Misfits, kind of this devil punk hard rock with Samhain, and then this kind of doom blues, like devil blues with Danzig. Great stuff. And as far as the timeline with Glenn Danzig's band projects, actually Misfits formed in 1977, Samhain was in 1983, and then eventually Danzig was in 1987. And then he definitely kind of bounced between the groups. Samhain, released an album before Danzig, but then he released Samhain albums, after Danzig. And then reformed and kind of reworked with Misfits and kind of bounced around between those projects. But here's basically a timeline to kind of help you see Glenn Danzig's progress with these bands. Honestly, when I think of Danzig's music, Danzig the band, I think of John Christ, the original guitarist with the group. And John actually just played on the first 4 albums, and they've released 12 albums. So he hasn't played with the band since the 90s. But for whatever reason, when I think of the band Danzig, I think of Glenn Danzig, and then I think of John Christ. So I wanted to include this in this episode because this is really the only time it's going to be appropriate to add this, but Glenn Danzig actually appears in one of my favorite episodes of Aqua Teen Hunger Force, from Adult Swim, and that episode is hilarious, and definitely I associate Glenn Danzig with Misfits, of course his band Danzig, and I think of John Christ and Mother and all these songs, and then somewhere in there I think of him on Aqua Teen and I always laugh. That's a great episode. So the music and chord-based examples in this episode came from 2 classic Danzig albums, and I was tempted to dive a little bit deeper into their catalog. They've released 12 albums, but there's really something special about those first 2. They're in standard tuning. They have this really dark kind of, I don't know, I call it doom blues, or this kind of gothic blues metal kind of thing, or whatever. And it's Glenn Danzig's vocals, like Elvis and Jim Morrison from Hell, mixed with John Christ's, heavy kind of bluesy riffs and stuff. Great music, and they never really sounded like that ever again. So I basically just targeted those 2 albums. So anyway, here we go. With the opening, that's the opening track from the first Danzig album with Twist of Cain. Great song, and I'm going to break it down. So we're basically starting with a single note riff, and it's all in the key of A. And we're bouncing along the open A string right there like this. Right? So start with the, basically it's an E flat, so that's the flat 5 of A, since we're in the key of A. So start with that E flat. And the first time you hear him hit this E, the second time he hits that E with a pinch harmonic, right there. Play that E twice. And then there's this chord right here. So it's an E flat 5 over B flat. So keep in mind that's the flat 5 as far as the power chord, and also the flat 9 as far as the root, because we're in the key of A. So that's as heavy as you can get right there. Flat 5 and a flat 9 like that. After the chord, then he starts grabbing that E flat and bends it into E. That was really cool. And it's just 2 power chords, A and C, like this. And the last time right there, you know what to do. It's that E flat over B flat again. And right back to that riff. Right here, 2 A power chords. So that 2 A power chords, that C to the open A, G to the open A, single notes. And right there, grab the bottom part of that E flat over B flat, right? And then it's C to D power chords. Totally kicks ass and completely fits Halloween and spooky season, right here in October. Perfect song. Next up's the song Soul on Fire from the first Danzig album. This is going to be pretty short and sweet. It's all power chords, but something like this. Something like that. So a B power chord. Hit the chord and then just start palm muting the root. Do the same thing in D right there, D5. Same thing in A. Back to D. You're going to add those 2 hits at the end. So instead of, just pedaling the root, you want to hit it like that. Go back to B. Then hit an E5 down there and just let it ring. Back to A. Back to D with the 2 hits. Up next is Am I Demon from the first Danzig album, and once again this is kind of short and sweet, but something like this. There's a cool chord twist, and there's some interesting John Christ chord twist happening, a little later in this episode. Here's the first kind of chord twist, like this. So pretty simple in the beginning, just D to E and start banging on the low E open there. And grab that G power chord up there and slide it off, and then just loop that riff right there. C5, let that ring, and then it moves to A major. And I love that little twist in the chords, you know, C5, which is implying, you know, A minor, technically. And then you hear it change to right there, and you hear that C sharp in the mix right there. And it goes right back to... Next up's Her Black Wings from Danzig 2 Lucifage, and this is really cool. There's a stacked power chord hiding in here too, like this. So at the beginning, it's just a single note riff, this F sharp, E to F, like that, just climbing over and over. Kind of reminds me of Parasite a little bit from Kiss, but in a different key, like that. And right there you hear a B5 over F sharp, so a stacked power chord right there. It just sounds massive, like Godzilla roaring or something right there. And then an A power chord. And go right back to the... That totally reminds me of John Sykes or somebody. You got the riff. Then you hear that F sharp to A, F sharp, and it's technically to a C right there, and it's kind of a slight pinch harmonic too. After the pinch harmonics on those two notes, you can do the riff again, then you're going to end with that stacked power chord to A. Next up is the song Killer Wolf. This also came from Danzig 2 Lucifage, and this definitely has the doom blues kind of sound I was talking about earlier, like this. So it starts with this G5, an open position right there, to an F power chord, then a B flat power chord, to a D, like a big stack D over A, or D5 over A. Do it again, and then one hit on that B flat 5, and then one hit on the D, D5 over A, and let it ring. And then this is where you hear the blues riff kind of come in like that. So you're basically sliding F into G, and you're kind of keeping that heartbeat kind of steady rhythm, and then you're moving between this, you know, with that G note. So that's an implied G minor right there, and then a G6, like that. And then a B flat 5 to G. Next up's Not of This World from the first Danzig album, so we're back on the first one again, and this is technically track 2, killer song like this. So it starts with an A power chord. So the A power chord, C to the open A, and then check it out, E to E flat again. So he's still, John's still messing with that E flat, the flat 5. And you want to do a pinch harmonic squeal on that E flat. And then do that A power chord again. And then C to G power chords right there. Do it again. Cycles of that, and then eventually it changes, and then you hear it go to B minor right there, and he's basically pedaling the root, and then you hear that higher pitched, kind of high part of the chord like that. So it's B minor like that, and then G major right there. Back to B minor, and then just finally end with that E5 power chord and let it ring. It's a really cool song, and it's not hard to play. It just hits you right in the gut, though. It's like, man, that's a killer song. Okay, last but not least is the song Possession from the first Danzig album, and you might want to go get a rosary or a crucifix or something, because this is pure evil, like this. So it's really interesting as far as the chords, and you hear John kind of doing these little like half-step bends on the root notes. And that first chord, it's basically an A flat 5. So it's A, E flat, A, E flat, stacked up like that. It's like the devil's power chord right there. But you're going to grab the root note first, and then you start kind of moshing through the chord like that. And then it changes to a G sharp 5 like that. So you have some mutual notes between those two chords. The A flat 5 had E flat right there, right? And then when it changes to that G sharp 5, technically that's now a D sharp over that G sharp. But it's the same note, right? E flat and D sharp are the same. So over A, it's the flat 5. And over G sharp, it's just the 5th. But then when you mix those together, it has the sinister twist like that. Right, and you got this kind of spooky single notes, and then you go right back to that G sharp 5. That's a really interesting, guitar part, and I love those chords where it's just twisted and sinister and dark. Perfect for Halloween. Perfect. Alright, that's going to wrap this episode of Chordplay with the Chords of Danzig. Definitely a very interesting band. I've always liked Glenn Danzig. I'm not a huge punk person, but I love Misfits. I also like Black Flag, Henry Rollins, the Ramones, of course. And then, it's like horror punk with Misfits. And then Samhain, I think he was trying to just be as radical and crazy as possible. But then I think he toned it down a little bit and definitely changed, by the time Danzig hit the scene. And then Glenn is kind of balanced between these three groups, I guess depending on how he feels or where the inspiration is. And like I mentioned at the beginning, there's something really special about those first two, Danzig albums. They never really returned to that kind of dark bluesy sound. And really blues music and metal, even though I think a lot of bands and groups out there, they kind of shun the blues influence. It depends on who it is. But there's definitely a classical, flavor in some metal, and then this kind of darker, bluesier kind of flavor in certain metal groups and bands. And I think it's appropriate. I mean, think of Robert Johnson, selling the soul to the devil and all that. And when you start tapping into some of those blues sounds in metal, I think it has this other kind of dimension or layer to it. It's really interesting. So anyway, leave some feedback and comments. Please subscribe to Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it with more content and material. Thank you.